The race to vaccinate the globe has been described as a two-track pandemic. Higher income countries have the head start, already administering 44% of the world's vaccines. Meanwhile, lower income countries have administered just 0.4%.
We're in the race of our lives, but it's not a fair race, and most countries have barely left the starting line.
Africa's only received enough vaccines for 3% of its population. The slow start is partly because, for decades, Africa has imported 99% of its vaccines. So, what would it take to jumpstart local vaccine manufacturing?
Manufacturing vaccines locally is an important step towards African self-reliance.
Today, there are only 5 countries with vaccine capabilities on the continent. Egypt, Morocco, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia all have companies that can package and label vaccines. Some can also do a process called fill and finish, getting vaccines ready for distribution. But none can do end-to-end manufacturing. That means making vaccines from start to finish, from creating the antigen all the way through to packaging it. But before vaccine production can even begin, the first step is to secure a patent waiver on the vaccine's intellectual property. Basically, that involves big pharmaceutical companies sharing their secret recipe and technique for the COVID-19 vaccine with other countries. This is so they can make and sell their own without getting fined or sued. In June, leaders of the world's 7 largest economies pledged to donate 870 million vaccines to poorer countries through the COVAX sharing scheme. But according to the WHO, to end the pandemic by June 2022, we need 11 billion doses to vaccinate 70% of the world's population. So far, we've reached just 21%. But only 2 of the 7 countries we mentioned, the US and France, support waiving the patent to vaccine technology. The UK, Germany, and the EU as a bloc all oppose it.
We have allowed the market forces to distribute vaccines because they were developed and generated by the private sector. And in such a situation, what you have is those who can afford will get. And so it has worsened the gap between the haves and the have-nots, especially because the wealthy countries put in advanced market commitments to buy far more vaccines than they will ever need.
While firms like Pfizer and BioNTech have agreed to provide vaccines to COVAX more cheaply, to date, not a single vaccine developer has agreed to participate in the WHO program set up in 2020 to facilitate the sharing of intellectual property and technology. In the meantime, big pharmaceutical companies are reaping huge profits, with 9 new vaccine billionaires created since the start of the pandemic. But even with a waiver secured, it's unlikely that Africa will be able to produce COVID vaccines in time or at scale just yet.
Patents is only one step in that process. You need to have the technologies, you need to have the capabilities and the capacities, because it's no use having rights or access to a patent, but you don't have the technologies or what we call the know-how.
Know-how means hiring and training up hundreds of staff to do everything from the science, i.e. making the antigen, to managing facilities, using newly developed technology and equipment, along with regulating, packaging, and distributing. And to do that requires money. So we asked a private pharmaceutical company in Kenya what it would take for their existing lab to begin producing vaccines at scale.
It's a huge investment, up to $150 million, plus minus. And to enable us as investors to put it in that, we need at least some sort of license commitment from the government.
For that commitment to work, African governments would have to agree to support local African pharmaceutical companies by buying a set number of vaccines from them every year, stopping them from being pushed out by big companies who hold monopolies on the market. So, with all these steps in place, how long could it take for Africa to produce its own vaccines? probably around 2 to 4 years. But this is about the long game. Removing barriers to local production is an investment not just against COVID-19, but the next pandemic.
We are hoping that the COVID dialogue will get us into a state of readiness for future pandemics, a better position with respect to supplying our continent with routine vaccines for routine immunization, as well as identifying potential organisms that will cause disease outbreaks that are relevant to Africa only.
In April, the African Union pledged to increase the shares of vaccines manufactured in Africa from 1% to 60% by 2040. A tall order given the current reality. But by making the right choices now, Africa could set itself up for any future outbreaks and minimize the damage they might do.